At my own wedding, standing at the altar, my future mother-in-law stood up and screamed, "That child isn't yours," referring to my beautiful son. She wanted to humiliate me, to prove I wasn't worthy of her perfect family. But then my groom, my hero, stopped the entire ceremony, handed his own father a sealed DNA test, and said, "Let's talk about your daughter instead." My mother-in-law's perfect world wasn't just about to end. It was about to burn. Before we get into all the insane details, I want to know, what is the craziest, most dramatic thing you have ever seen happen at a wedding? Let me know in the comments below. I have a feeling some of you have some wild stories. Also, make sure you are already following the channel. It means the world to me and helps to keep bringing juicy stories for you. Okay, let's go back to the months leading up to that fateful day. My love story with John was the kind I thought only happened in fairy tales. After a difficult divorce and years of being a single mother, he had walked into my life and not just accepted, but wholeheartedly embraced both me and my 8-year-old son, Lucas. He wasn't just my fiancé. He was Lucas's soccer coach, his homework helper, his best friend. He was the kind, steady, and honorable man I had stopped believing existed. Our little family of 3 was my entire world, and our wedding was supposed to be the beautiful, official beginning of our forever. There was just one dragon guarding the gates of our fairy tale, John's mother, Helen. From the moment John had introduced us, Helen had made her disapproval chillingly clear. I was not the woman she had envisioned for her perfect, successful son. I was a divorcee. I came with baggage. The baggage, in this case, being my wonderful, bright, and loving son, Lucas. To Helen, who was obsessed with the concept of her family's bloodline, Lucas was not a child to be loved, but a permanent, living symbol of my past, a contamination of her precious family tree. Her cruelty was a campaign of 1,000 small cuts. At our engagement dinner, she had given a toast to John, talking at length about his bright future and her excitement for the real, pure-blooded grandchildren he would one day give her, never once mentioning me or Lucas by name. When we went wedding dress shopping, she had looked at the traditional white dress I had chosen and said, with a thin, cruel smile, "Are you sure that's appropriate, dear, considering the circumstances?" I endured it all for John. I would smile my polite smile, absorb the insults, and tell him later that it was fine, that she would come around. He, however, did not let it go. He would defend me fiercely, his arguments with his mother becoming more and more frequent. But she was a wall of cold, unshakable prejudice. The worst of it came about a month before the wedding. Helen had invited us over for dinner. She had sat me down in her pristine, museum-like living room, a place utterly devoid of warmth, for a heart-to-heart. "Maria," she had said, her voice a mask of false sincerity, "I want you to understand my position. John is my only son. The Davenport name is an important one in this city. It is his duty to carry on that name, to produce an heir who is truly a Davenport." She had looked at me then, her eyes like chips of ice. "Lucas is a sweet boy, I'm sure, but he is not, and never will be, one of us. He is not blood. I need you to accept that. He can be at the wedding, of course, but he will not be a part of the family photos on the altar. That is for family only." The insult, so direct, so profoundly cruel to my innocent son, was almost more than I could bear, but it was John's reaction when I told him later that I will never forget. I had never seen him so angry. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. "That's it," he had said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She has finally crossed a line that she can never uncross. I'm done trying to reason with her. It's time for a new plan." In the weeks that followed, a strange, quiet resolve settled over John. He stopped arguing with his mother. He became calm, almost detached whenever she was around. I thought he had simply given up. A part of me saddened that her cruelty had won. I had no idea that his silence was not the silence of surrender, but the silence of a general preparing his forces for a battle he knew he could not lose. The morning of our wedding, he came to the bridal suite where I was getting ready. He looked impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. He took my hands in his. "Today," he said, his eyes boring into mine, full of a fierce protective love, "is about us. You, me, and Lucas. Our family. Nothing and no one will ever ruin that. I promise you." He hugged me tightly, and as he did, I felt something stiff and rectangular in the inner pocket of his jacket, like a thick, legal-sized envelope. I assumed it was his handwritten vows, or perhaps the marriage license. A small, romantic detail. I just smiled, pushing the thought of the strange envelope from my mind, completely unaware that my loving, gentle fiancé wasn't just carrying his vows in his pocket. He was carrying a weapon of mass destruction, aimed directly at the heart of his own family, ready to be deployed the moment his mother decided to fire the first shot. After John left the bridal suite, his promise, "Nothing and no one will ever ruin this day for us," echoed in my ears. I chose to believe him. I chose to focus on the overwhelming love I felt for him, a love that I believed was strong enough to shield me from her relentless disapproval. My silent sacrifice, the one I had been making for the better part of a year, was the act of absorbing her quiet cruelties, of smiling through her backhanded compliments, of pretending I didn't see the dismissive way she looked at my son, Lucas. I sacrificed my own anger, my own pride on the altar of family peace because I loved her son and I desperately wanted our new life together to work. What I couldn't possibly have known, as I sat there having my hair pinned and my makeup applied, was the story of the sacrifice he had been making. I didn't know the true weight of the secret that was resting in that stiff, legal-sized envelope in his pocket. He told me everything much, much later, after the dust had settled, after the world had been remade. And this, I now know, is how it happened. The secret had its roots in the death of his maternal grandfather, about a year before our wedding. John, being the responsible one, had volunteered to clear out the old man's dusty, forgotten attic. Tucked away in the back, under a pile of old military uniforms, he found a small, locked wooden box. He found the key in his old grandfather's desk. He had expected to find old war medals or sentimental trinkets. Instead, he found a stack of letters bundled together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was his mother's. He told me he had started to read them out of a sense of sentimental curiosity. They were letters a young, newly married Helen had written to her own father decades ago. The first few were full of the normal anxieties of a young wife. But then the tone changed. He found a series of letters from 30 years ago, the year his younger sister, Claire, was born. They were not letters, they were confessions. I can only imagine him sitting there in the dusty, quiet attic, the world shifting beneath him as he read his own mother's words. She wrote of the time his father, George, had been away for a 3-month-long overseas project. She wrote of her loneliness, of a brief, intense, and foolish affair with an old friend from college who had been passing through town. And then she wrote of the terrible, life-altering secret she had discovered upon George's return. She was pregnant, and the child, she confessed to her own father in the letter, was not George's. Claire, his perfect golden child sister, the one his father doted on, the one who was the very apple of his eye, was the product of that affair. The letters detailed my mother-in-law's panic, her guilt, and her ultimate cowardly decision. She never told her husband. She let him believe the child was his.
She had sworn her own father to secrecy, and he had, it seemed, taken that secret to his grave, but not before preserving the proof. John told me he had felt physically ill. His entire family, the proud, unshakable Davenport dynasty he had been raised in, was built on a foundation of a profound and devastating lie. His first instinct was to burn the letters, to rebury the secret and protect his father from a truth that would surely destroy him. And for a time, he did. He locked the letters away and tried to forget what he had learned. Then, a few months later, he met me, and he fell in love, not just with me, but with my son, Lucas. And as he brought me into his family, he began to see his mother's character with new, horrified eyes. He saw her cold, dismissive treatment of me. He heard her constant, cruel whispers about bloodlines, about how Lucas would never be a real Davenport. The hypocrisy of it, he said, was a poison. She was judging my son, an innocent child, by a standard of genetic purity that she herself had so spectacularly violated. It was after the horrible dinner where she had demanded that Lucas be excluded from the family photos on the altar that he knew he could no longer stay silent. But a direct confrontation would be a messy war of accusations. He needed proof. He needed a weapon of last resort, an insurance policy against his mother's cruelty. He told me with a deep sense of shame about the week he had gathered the samples. It was a distasteful, clandestine operation that made him feel like a spy in his own family. He had taken a handful of hairs from his sister Claire's hairbrush in her bathroom. He had retrieved a water glass his father had just finished using from his study. He sent the samples, along with one of his own, to a discreet, highly reputable DNA lab, requesting a sibling analysis and a paternity test. The results came back a month before the wedding. They were cold, scientific, and absolute. They confirmed the 30-year-old secret his mother had written about in her letters. He sealed the lab report in a thick legal envelope and hid it at the bottom of his desk drawer, praying to God he would never have to use it. It was his nuclear option, a weapon to be deployed only in the face of his mother's total, unconditional warfare against his new family. And now, as I stood at the back of the church, the organ beginning to play the familiar, beautiful notes of the bridal march, I was completely unaware of the stakes. I saw my mother-in-law, Helen, in the front pew, her face a mask of cold, regal disapproval, and I steeled myself for her quiet, cutting remarks at the reception. I thought the only battle I had to fight today was a social one, a battle of wills against a difficult woman. I had no idea that my fiancé was walking to that altar not just with a ring in his pocket, but with a secret so devastating it had the power to bring our two families to their knees. I thought the greatest secret of the day was the depth of my love for him. I didn't know that the real secret was sealed in an envelope, a ticking time bomb of truth, waiting for his mother to light the fuse. The morning of my wedding was a blur of beautiful, happy chaos. My bridal suite was filled with the scent of hairspray and fresh flowers, and the excited, cheerful chatter of my bridesmaids. But through it all, a single clear image was fixed in my mind: John's face, the look of profound and steady love in his eyes when he had left me just hours before. His promise, "Nothing and no one will ever ruin this day for us," was a shield around my heart. The strange, stiff envelope in his pocket was a forgotten detail, a minor mystery eclipsed by the overwhelming joy of the day. When the church doors swung open and the organ swelled into the first triumphant notes of the bridal march, I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the long aisle, waiting for me at the altar, and the look on his face was everything I had ever dreamed of. All the anxiety, all the fear of his mother's disapproval, it all just melted away. My son, my sweet Lucas, walked ahead of me, a miniature version of John in his tiny, perfect tuxedo. He carried the satin pillow with our rings on it with a seriousness that was both adorable and deeply moving. As he reached the front, John leaned down and gave him a conspiratorial wink, and Lucas beamed, his job as ring bearer successfully completed. As I walked down that aisle on my own father's arm, I passed the front pew. My future father-in-law, George, gave me a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. But beside him sat my future mother-in-law, Helen. She did not smile. She just stared at me, her face a mask of cold, stony disapproval, her eyes like chips of ice. For a fleeting second, a chill went through me, but then I looked past her, back to John, and I let her go. She was just a bitter, unhappy woman, and I would not let her poison this perfect moment. The ceremony was a dream. We stood before the priest, our hands clasped together, and we said our vows. John's voice was a low, steady, and confident rumble as he promised to love and honor me. And then he added a part we had written ourselves. He turned slightly to include my son. "And I promise, Lucas," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "to love you as my own son, to protect you, to guide you, and to be the father you deserve, always." I saw Helen's face in my peripheral vision tighten, a small, almost imperceptible flinch of fury. But I didn't care. The three of us, in that moment, were a family, and the whole world knew it. We exchanged rings, our hands steady, our future feeling as solid and as beautiful as the gold bands we now wore. The priest smiled, raising his hands in a final blessing. "And now," he said, his voice echoing in the hushed, reverent silence of the church, "if anyone here has any just cause why this man and this woman should not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." It was a line I had heard in 100 movies, a quaint, archaic piece of tradition that no one ever takes seriously. A polite, formal silence fell over the church. The guests smiled, ready for the final pronouncement. The priest took a breath, ready to declare us husband and wife. "I object." The voice was not a shout. It was a sharp, clear and venomous declaration that cut through the sacred silence like a shard of glass. Every head in the church swiveled toward the front pew. It was Helen. She was on her feet, her gloved hand trembling, her face a mask of righteous, theatrical fury. A collective, horrified gasp went through the church. The priest froze, his mouth agape. My own heart stopped in my chest. This wasn't happening. This could not be happening. "I object," she repeated, her voice now rising to a near scream. "This entire marriage is a fraud. My son, my innocent son, is being deceived." She then turned, and with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, she pointed a trembling, accusatory finger not at me, but at my 8-year-old son, Lucas, who was standing beside the altar. "That child," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the church, "is not my son's. He is not a Davenport. She is a gold digger, a divorced tramp who has tricked my son into raising another man's bastard child, and I will not stand by in silence and watch her pollute my family's bloodline with this lie." The world exploded into a nightmare. Lucas, the target of this vicious public attack, burst into terrified tears. My own mother stood up from her seat shouting, "Helen, you monster!" The guests were in an uproar, their whispers a rising, chaotic tide of scandal and shock. And I just stood there, at the altar, my beautiful white dress feeling like a shroud, my body frozen, my mind completely shattered by the sheer monstrous cruelty of the woman who was supposed to become my family. But then I felt a hand on my arm. It was John. I looked at him, and the man I saw was not the panicked, heartbroken groom I expected. His face was a mask of utter, chilling calm. The look in his eyes was not one of anger, but of a deep, profound, and sorrowful finality.
the look of a general who had known this attack was coming and was now, at last, ready to unleash his own devastating response. He squeezed my hand once, a silent promise, before he turned and took the microphone from the stunned priest's hand. My mother-in-law had just declared war on my family in the middle of a holy sacrament. She thought she was firing the first shot. She had no idea he was about to end the war with a single, devastating counterstrike. The world, which had been a beautiful, sunlit dream just moments before, had collapsed into a chaotic, ugly nightmare. My mother-in-law-to-be, Helen, stood in the front pew, her face flush with a triumphant, venomous righteousness. My beautiful, innocent son, Lucas, was sobbing, his small body shaking with the terror and confusion that shattered my heart into a million pieces. The church, once a sanctuary of our love, was now a theater of my deepest humiliation, filled with the shocked, whispering, and pitying faces of our friends and family. I stood at the altar, frozen, a runaway bride who had nowhere left to run. And then I felt John's hand on my arm. His touch was not frantic or panicked. It was calm, steady, and full of a chilling, absolute purpose. He squeezed my hand once, a silent promise, before he let go. He knelt down first, ignoring the chaos, and spoke softly to my crying son. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, his voice for Lucas alone. "The grown-ups are just being silly. None of this is your fault. I love you." He then stood, his back straight, and turned to face the wreckage of our wedding. He took the microphone from the stunned priest's hand, and a strange, powerful silence began to fall over the church. His calm was more commanding than any shout. He waited for every last whisper to die down. Then he looked directly at his mother.
voice amplified, echoing through the cavernous, silent church. "You are right about one thing, Mom." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Helen herself looked momentarily taken aback, a flicker of smug victory in her eyes. She thought he was about to concede, to capitulate to her demands. "Lucas," John continued, his voice clear and unwavering, "is not my biological son. I have never lied about that. I met and fell in love with his incredible mother long after he was born. He is my son in every way that truly matters. In my heart, in my home, and in my life. But he is not, as you so crudely put it, of my blood." "Thank you," he said, his voice dripping with a cold, lethal irony, "for making it so abundantly clear to everyone here today how important the absolute, unimpeachable purity of our family's bloodline is to you." He then turned his gaze from his mother to his father, George, who was standing beside her, his face a mask of deep, profound embarrassment and shame at his wife's outburst. "And it is that deep, profound respect for the truth of our family's blood," John said, his voice now low and dangerous, "that leaves me no other choice." Then he did something I will never forget. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo, the very pocket I had noticed that morning, and he pulled out a thick, sealed, legal-sized envelope. The action was slow, deliberate, and full of an almost unbearable menace. The entire church watched, holding its collective breath, as he walked down the 2 short steps from the altar and approached his own father. He stopped in front of him. The 2 men, father and son, stood face to face. Then John held up the microphone to his lips one last time, his eyes still locked on his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice like ice, a sound that cut through the last vestiges of the church's sacred peace. "You wanted to stand up here in the middle of my wedding and talk about the truth of my son's parentage?" He paused, letting the words land with their full, devastating weight. "Let's talk about your daughter instead." And then he clicked off the microphone and handed the envelope to his stunned, confused father-in-law. The only sound in the entire, vast church was the soft, terrible rustle of paper as my father-in-law, with trembling, uncomprehending hands broke the seal and pulled out the document inside. It was not a letter. It was a formal lab report filled with scientific charts and legal jargon he could not understand. But his eyes, and the eyes of everyone in the front pews who were craning their necks to see, immediately found the bottom of the page, where a single, simple, and utterly devastating conclusion was printed in bold black letters. It was a DNA paternity test analysis for himself, George Davenport, and his daughter, Claire Davenport. And the final line read, "Probability of paternity, 0.00%. I watched as my father-in-law's world ended. He read the line once, then twice, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. He looked up from the paper, his face a hollow, gray mask of utter, soul-shattering devastation. He looked at his wife of 35 years, Helen, whose triumphant, hateful expression had now collapsed into one of pure, animal terror as she realized what her son had just done. And then he looked over at his beloved daughter, his princess, my bridesmaid, Claire, who was watching from the altar, her face a picture of innocent confusion, completely unaware that her entire identity had just been detonated in front of 200 people. The wedding was over, the party was over, my old life was over, but a new, terrible, and far more fascinating drama had just begun right there at the altar, and my husband, my quiet, gentle John, had just become its sole avenging author.
The silence in the grand, sunlit church was a profound and terrible thing. It was the silence of a bomb having been detonated, the moment of stunned quiet before the shockwaves hit and the world comes crashing down. My father-in-law, George, stood in the aisle, his hand trembling as he clutched the single, damning sheet of paper. His face, which had been a mask of embarrassment just moments before, had crumbled into a look of such profound, quiet devastation that it was 1,000 times more terrible than any shout could ever be. He looked at his wife, my mother-in-law, Helen. He didn't scream, he didn't rage. He just whispered her name, a sound so full of a lifetime of broken trust that it seemed to echo off the stone walls. Helen? My mother-in-law, the proud, untouchable matriarch, the woman who had just tried to destroy my life with such vicious public glee, finally broke. Her face, a mask of triumphant hatred just a minute ago, was now a ruin of pure animal terror. She looked at her husband, at the proof in his hand, and she seemed to shrink in on herself, a queen suddenly stripped of her crown, her army, her entire kingdom, left with nothing but her own treason. I watched as my sister-in-law, Claire, the golden child, the princess of the family, looked from her mother's terrified face to her father's devastated one, the horrifying truth of her own identity dawning on her with a slow, sickening dread. Her entire life, her very name had been a lie. This was the wreckage my husband, John, had created, or rather, the wreckage his mother had forced him to reveal. He did not stay to survey the damage. His war was over. His loyalty was now clear. He turned his back on the smoldering ruins of the family he had been born into. He walked back to the altar, to me and to my son, Lucas, who was now huddled against my wedding dress, his small body still shaking with sobs. John knelt down, wrapping us both in his strong, protective arms. "This is my family now," he whispered, his voice for us and us alone, the only one that matters. He stood up, taking my hand in one and Lucas's in the other. "Let's go home." And we did. We turned our backs on the chaos, on the whispers, on the shattered pieces of the Davenport family, and we walked, the three of us, hand in hand, down that long, silent aisle. The 200 guests parted for us, their faces a sea of shock, pity, and a strange, dawning respect. We were not fleeing a disaster. We were walking away from one, a united front, a new family forged in a fire of someone else's making. The weeks that followed were a quiet, painful epilogue to the drama of that day. The Davenport divorce was swift,
brutal, and the talk of the town, the perfect society couple, the unshakable dynasty, was no more. Helen, I heard, had been left with a fraction of the fortune she had fought so hard to protect, her 30-year lie having cost her everything. Claire, the innocent victim in all of this, was now left to rebuild her identity from the ground up, caught between a mother she could no longer trust and a father who could barely look at her without seeing a betrayal. John's phone was a constant barrage of calls from his mother, swinging wildly from abusive rage to pathetic, tearful pleading. He answered only one of them. I listened as he spoke, his voice calm and final. "You did this, Mom. You stood up in a church and you tried to destroy an innocent child to satisfy your own pride. You chose to throw the first stone. These are your consequences. Not mine, not ours." He had then told her not to contact him again, and he had blocked her number.
Our own wedding, when it happened a month later, was the complete opposite of the first. There was no grand church, no sea of guests. It was just the three of us, my own small family, and one surprise guest in the quiet, sunlit office of a justice of the peace. John's father, George, was there. He looked older, sadder, but his eyes, when he looked at me and Lucas, were full of a new quiet warmth and a profound, apologetic respect. He had chosen his son. He had chosen our new, honest family. He was the one who acted as our witness. As John and I exchanged our vows that day, they were not just promises for the future. They were a celebration of what we had survived. When he turned to Lucas and gave him a small silver locket, promising once again to be the father he deserved, the tears I cried were not of humiliation, but of a joy so deep and so profound, I felt it in my very soul. That night, after we were finally, officially Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, we didn't have a lavish reception. We went home, ordered 3 large pizzas with extra pepperoni, and watched a movie on the couch, with Lucas curled up asleep between us. It was simple. It was real. It was perfect. I looked at my husband, at this good, honorable man who had been willing to detonate his own world to protect mine, and I finally understood. The vindication I felt was not in the public shaming of his mother. It was in the quiet, unshakable proof of his love. Helen, in her obsession with the purity of blood, had forgotten the most important thing. That real family isn't about the blood you share. It's about the loyalty you choose. It's about the truths you are willing to fight for. And the three of us, the little family she had tried so hard to break, had just proven that our bond was the strongest of all. An absolutely unbelievable story of wedding day drama and a husband's ultimate act of loyalty. What do you think of John's decision to reveal the secret in such a public way? Let us know your thoughts on this incredible story in the comments below. If you were on the edge of your seat during this powerful story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more daily stories of karma and shocking revenge. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.